They say you can hike the entire Appalachian Trail and never see the same thing twice. Mountains shift under fog, trees twist into different shapes, and even the air feels different depending on where you are or what is near you. Most come here searching for something: solitude, peace, the quiet that only comes when the modern world disappears behind a curtain of pine and stone. They pack their bags, lace their boots, count the miles, and for a while, they find what they're looking for. But some don't. Because there are parts of this trail that aren't on the maps, places where the terrain seems to loop in on itself, places where a step too far in any direction feels like a step back in time, or worse, a step into else's territory. The hikers who know, the ones who've been out there long enough, they stop talking when you mention certain areas. They glance toward the woods, even in daylight. And if you press them, their stories don't sound like stories. They sound like warnings dressed as riddles. Muttered phrases like, "Don't sleep near the third shelter past Low Gap," or, "If you hear footsteps behind you after dark, just keep walking. Don't turn around." There are sections where compasses jitter, GPS freezes. You check your watch and realize an hour passed, but the sun hasn't moved. And every so often, someone disappears. Sometimes it's chalked up to weather or exhaustion or wildlife. But the search teams, they talk too. Off the record, about empty footprints, about gear found neatly stacked at the edge of a ridge no one was supposed to be on, about voices coming through radios that hadn't worked in years. These woods are old, older than the country, older than the names scratched into trail signs or printed in glossy brochures. The stones underfoot have watched centuries pass. And they don't care who you are, how experienced, how careful, how prepared. If they decide you don't belong, you won't make it to the next shelter. We interviewed rangers who refused to go on record. One of them left the room halfway through, hands shaking. Another told us about a call they got from a group of hikers, said they'd found a man wandering barefoot in the snow, mumbling in a language none of them recognized. When help arrived, there was no man, just bare footprints that led into a ravine and stopped. Then there were the recovered journals, torn, water-damaged pages mailed to us anonymously. One of them belonged to a solo hiker who documented strange sounds every night, whistling patterns that moved closer, then farther, never quite circling his tent. He wrote about dreams that weren't dreams, waking up with his boots on the wrong feet, his flashlight buried 6 inches in the dirt outside. On the final page, dated 3 days after his scheduled return. It's waiting just beyond the tree line. I see it every time I close my eyes. It's patient. I don't think I'll make it back. He didn't. We also received an audio cassette, unmarked, recorded on an old analog mic. Heavy breathing, rustling. Then a voice whispering, "It followed us from the overlook." It's pretending to be Josh. There were 3 distinct voices in the beginning of that tape. Only one by the end. And that heartbeat? That steady, low thump you sometimes hear under the wind when you're out there alone? Most people ignore it, blame their own pulse. But one of our contacts, Horodovrai, wilderness medic with over a decade of SAR missions, said something I still think about. He told us, the ones who vanish, every time we check their last known coordinates, the forest sounds different, still. Like it's holding its breath. That's what this series is about. The hush that falls when the forest knows something you don't. So if you're watching this at night, turn off your lights, listen closely, because the stories you're about to hear aren't based on campfire tales or second-hand folklore. These come from voices who were there, hikers, locals, rangers, people with no reason to lie and every reason to forget. Some of them made it back, some didn't. But every single one left a piece of themselves behind. And now, so will you. You're about to cross a threshold. From this point on, you'll hear things that weren't supposed to be recorded. You'll see fragments, corrupted footage, blurred faces, trails overgrown by silence. But every frame is real. Every word came from someone who thought they'd never speak of it again. The Appalachian Trail has always been more than a path. For some, it's a rite of passage. For others, it's a test. And for a rare few, the unlucky ones, it becomes something else entirely. A place where the rules shift, where you're never truly alone, even when the map says you are. What you'll see in this volume was gathered from deep within that forgotten corridor, between shelters with no names, along switchbacks that no longer exist, and from those who barely made it back. The forest doesn't like to give up its secrets, but sometimes, if you listen close, it slips. A faint sound on the wind, a shape you didn't notice until it moved, a voice calling your name from the wrong direction. These stories were buried, lost in static, smothered in fear. But they're surfacing now, and once you hear them, you'll never walk that trail the same way again. They're watching. He didn't set out looking for trouble. Most of them never do. 27-year-old Nathan Bell was a solo thru hiker with a clean record, good gear, and more experience than most weekend hikers combined. He'd been on the trail for over 3 weeks when he hit the stretch, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, a region where cell service fades and the ridgelines roll like waves under cloud. On the 4th day in, the weather shifted, fast. A clean sky at noon turned to a charcoal smear by late afternoon. He checked his maps, physical and digital. Nearest shelter was 5 miles ahead, too far to make it before the storm hit. That's when he saw it. Tucked behind a bend in the trail, half covered in vine and shadow, was a Linda-style shelter he didn't recognize. No sign, no marker, no indication on his guidebook, but it looked solid. Fresh timber, new nails, even a dry stack of firewood under a flap of tarp. The rain hit hard a few minutes later. He ducked inside. It was bone dry. He didn't think too much of it at first. Maybe it was new. Maybe a volunteer-built outpost not yet on the maps. Maybe he just got lucky. He should have kept walking. It wasn't until after sundown that things began to feel off. First, the silence. Not just quiet, a vacuum. No drip of rain, no wind, no distant howl of coyotes or rustle of deer. It was like the world had gone on mute. Second, the shelter itself. Too clean. No trash tucked into the corners, no initials carved into the wood, no soot above the fire pit, no spider webs, not even dust. It felt staged. Nathan set up his sleeping bag anyway, lit a small headlamp, and flipped through his notebook. Tried to write something about the storm, the hike, the miles covered. His pen dried out. Odd. He shook it, scribbled on the corner of a page. Nothing. He reached for his watch to check the time. 2:17 p.m. But it was pitch black outside. He tapped the screen. Nothing changed. He pressed a button. It reset, then blinked back to 2:17. He swore under his breath and zipped into his bag. Tried to sleep. That's when he heard it. A low hum. A woman's voice. Just outside the wall. Too soft to make out the words, but loud enough that it wasn't imagined. It rose and fell like an old lullaby. Nathan sat up. "Hello?" he called out. The humming stopped. He waited. Listened. Nothing. He leaned over and unzipped the shelter flap, peered into the darkness. His light beam barely reached the tree line. No one was there. He zipped it shut again. Tried to convince himself it had been wind. A bird. maybe even a radio signal, though he had none on him. An hour passed, then two, then, from behind his head, against the rear wall of the shelter, came three distinct knocks. He turned. Heart racing, nothing. Just the wooden slats, bare and still. He didn't sleep. The second night was worse. The rain had stopped. The air had gone cold. Nathan debated leaving, but the next shelter, the one he knew existed, was still miles away, uphill, and darkness was falling again. Around 1 a.m., he heard footsteps outside, light, slow, purposeful. He stayed still. Then, a flicker of light near the fire pit. He sat up, blinked. The fire wasn't lit, but there was a glow. A figure, crouched where the flames should have been, its back to him, head down, perfectly still. Nathan reached slowly for his headlamp. It flicked on. The glow vanished. The figure was gone. His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the clearing. Silence. He lowered the light, and then, a voice. Software. Warm. Too familiar. Nate? Honey? His mother's voice. Nathan froze. She lived in Vermont. No one knew where he was. The voice came again from the trees. Why won't you come say hello? He stood, legs shaking. Who's there? He called out, louder than before. No answer. Then, again, his mother's voice right at the tree line. Don't you recognize my voice, sweetheart? I'm waiting. He backed away, reached for his pack. His light flickered. Once. Twice. Then the batteries dropped to 0 in an instant. Everything went dark. No footsteps, no voice, just that same low humming. Now directly behind him. He didn't look. He didn't move. He stayed that way until the first light of dawn. As soon as the sun breached the ridge, Nathan bolted. No breakfast, no packing, just boots on and gone. The trail seemed different now. He followed the markers, checked the compass, moved north, uphill, toward the next official shelter. But every half mile, something felt off. The trees were too familiar, the turns too sharp. His own footprints, seen twice. After 3 hours, the trail opened up. There it was, the same shelter, same tarp, same wood stack, same exact, perfect silence. He turned and ran the opposite way. By late afternoon, he stumbled into a ranger station near the edge of the park. Half delirious, soaked in sweat, pale. He told them everything. The ranger, older man, white beard, tired eyes, just listened. When Nathan finished, the ranger stood. Son, he said, ain't no shelter up there anymore, not since the fire. Nathan blinked. What fire? Storm knocked a tree down in 93, caught a spark, whole thing lit up. Volunteer group found what was left of it a week later. Nothing but ash and some old gear. Nathan said nothing. Couldn't. The ranger sighed. You're not the first to come back rattled from that ridge, but you are the first in a while. He paused, then added, next time, if you see a shelter that clean and it ain't on the map, don't go in. Nathan never returned to the trail. But the shelter? Some say it still appears when storms roll in, and if you hear humming through the wall, you're already too late. They weren't the kind of couple that scared easily. Amy and Jacob had been camping together for years, from Joshua Tree to Big Bend, Yellowstone to the Catskills. They'd weathered blizzards in a 2-person tent, stared down a black bear on a ridge trail in Oregon, even pulled ticks off each other after a particularly rough summer hike. But this was different. Devil's Hollow wasn't on their original itinerary. It was a last-minute detour, a whisper in an online forum about an unspoiled slice of wilderness on the edge of the Appalachian backcountry. Secluded, quiet, supposedly beautiful, the name didn't bother them. Most places like that came with colorful folklore, ghost stories to keep tourists away. Amy laughed when they the nearby town and asked for directions. It was the shopkeeper's face that gave her pause. "Devil's Hollow?" he repeated, setting down a carton of milk. Jacob nodded. "You'll hear screaming," the man said flatly. "Just don't go looking." Amy glanced at Jacob. "Screaming?" The man's eyes didn't leave hers. "Woman, sounds like she's in pain. Every night, like clockwork. Been that way for decades." Jacob smirked. "And no one's found her?" "They've tried," the man said, and paused. "Some didn't come back." They left before he said anything else. They pitched their tent at the edge of a clearing. Low brush, fire ring, even a weathered log for sitting. It felt normal, beautiful even. The canopy overhead filtered the sun into a soft amber glow. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called early. A breeze carried pine and earth. By sundown, it was silent. No birdsong, no insects, not even wind. Jacob commented on it first. "It's like someone hit mute." Amy laughed. Nature break, maybe. But her voice felt too loud in the stillness. They went to bed early. Just past 1 a.m., the first scream came. It was distant. A long, ragged wail that began low, almost like a sob, and rose into something sharp and inhuman. It echoed, not across the hollow, but within it, like it belonged to the trees themselves. Amy sat straight up. Jacob reached for the flashlight. "Probably a fox," he muttered, too quickly. But foxes didn't cry like that. Not in words, because this had words. "Help me." The second scream came minutes later, then a third, closer. Then, silence. They didn't sleep. The next morning, the wildlife was gone. No birds in the trees, no squirrels darting through the brush, no fresh tracks. The air felt hollowed out, like something had swept through and scraped it clean. They checked their phones. No signal. GPS map wouldn't load. They hiked out to higher ground, tried to triangulate their location. The GPS blinked, recalculated, then led them in a circle. They passed the same fallen log, the same rock with the lichen split down the middle. Amy marked the trail with a piece of orange ribbon. An hour later, they passed it again. Twice. They didn't talk much after that. That night, they double-checked the tent's zippers, packed their bags ahead of time, made a plan. If they heard her again, they wouldn't move, no matter what. They sat awake for hours, holding hands in the dark, counting the seconds between gusts of wind. Then came the first scream. This time there were no words, just pain, massive, raw pain, ripping through the trees. Then, footsteps, software, wet, crunching leaves, drawing closer. Then a voice, just beyond the nylon wall. "Can you help me?" Amy whispered Jacob's name. He reached for the flashlight. It wouldn't turn on. The footsteps circled the tent. Stopped. Then, a woman's voice again, calm, almost cheerful. "I'm right here." The zipper moved. They both screamed. Jacob lunged, held the zipper shut with both hands, shaking. The footsteps retreated. For a moment. Silence. Then, a giggle. Light. Delighted. Amy turned her head slowly toward the tent flap. Fog had rolled in. Dense. Wet. Pressed against the nylon. And then, a face. A woman. Smiling. Wide. Too wide. Skin pale. Eyes too far apart. Watching them. Then, gone. The fog swallowed her. No sound of footsteps. No rustle of brush. Just gone. They didn't move until dawn. When the light finally returned, it looked wrong. Muted. Gray. As if the sun had dimmed. They bolted. Didn't break camp. Didn't eat. Just grabbed what they could and ran, trusting instinct over technology. Hours later, the woods thinned. They found a ranger outpost. Banged on the door, breathless. The ranger listened without blinking. When they finished, he said only this: "She doesn't usually show herself." They asked if it had happened before. He nodded once. Used to be a logging town near the Hollow, back in the 1800s. Woman lost her husband in a mill fire, spent weeks screaming for him in the woods. They say she vanished during the first snow, never found a body. Amy asked if it was a ghost. The ranger just said, "Wouldn't call it that. She knows she's dead. That's what makes her dangerous." They returned to their car. It was locked, still sealed. Inside, across the interior windshield, were 3 deep, jagged claw marks. The seats were damp. The dome light flickered on by itself. They drove 7 hours without stopping. Neither one of them has camped since. Next time someone tells you not to follow the sound of a scream in the woods, listen. Because some voices are there only to be heard. And once you hear them, they never forget you. There are files you don't find in the Park Service database. Incidents that get talked about in quiet corners of ranger stations, passed between shifts in the form of muttered warnings and subtle glances. This is one of them. Ranger Tom Ellery had been with the National Park Service for over 20 years. Most of those years were quiet. Maintenance reports, lost dogs, drunk campers, routine. But the incident he remembers most clearly didn't involve a storm or a bear or even an injury. It started with a barefoot man stumbling out of the woods just before sunrise. The man, mid-30s, dehydrated, half-starved, had wandered into the ranger station off Trail Ridge, dazed and mumbling. He said his name was Lucas Marin, and he had been gone 5 days. But according to him, he'd only been hiking for 30 minutes. He had no shoes, no gear, no pack, just a shredded flannel shirt and a weather-beaten spiral notebook gripped in his right hand. That notebook would become central to everything that came after. Inside, page after page of frantic, looping handwriting, almost all of it unreadable, repetitions, scratches, diagrams, trails that didn't exist. And then, scrawled across the last page in thick black ink, marker 47 bleeds. No one knew what that meant. Not yet. Tom was assigned to the follow-up, a simple trail inspection. Standard protocol anytime someone is reported missing and recovered with injuries or disorientation. He figured maybe the guy fell, hit his head, got turned around. Heat stroke, possibly. Dehydration could mess with your sense of time. But the map didn't make sense. Lucas had entered on Trail 9, a loop trail that takes about 45 minutes at a casual pace. If his story was right, he should have been found within a mile of the trailhead. Instead, he emerged over 12 miles away, in a part of the forest that hadn't had active foot traffic in years. And then there was the notebook. Marker furtive bleeder. Tom had walked that area dozens of times and couldn't recall a marker 47. The park trail markers only went up to 41 in that sector. So he pulled out an old paper map, archived, printed in the early 90s, and there it was. Tucked behind a long discontinued path labeled Basin Trail Spur. A simple blaze, a tree notch, but not on any modern maps. So he set out that afternoon, alone. The path was overgrown but still passable. Around the 2-mile mark, he found it, a decaying wooden post, half rotted and split from years of frost and sun. A rusted 47 nailed to its top. It shouldn't have meant anything. But as Tom stepped closer, he noticed something strange at the base, staining, dark, reddish-brown, smudged across the bark like fingerprints. Old, but not dry. Not quite. He knelt down, touched the smear with a gloved finger. It was sticky, wet. He stood up fast, radioed in his coordinates, but all he heard was static. And then, voices. Not words, just breathy fragments, whispers inside the channel. He stepped back, checked the signal. 5 bars. He radioed again. "Control, this is Ranger Ellery. I need confirmation. Say again, confirm transmission." Nothing but the sound of breathing, several voices now, layered, overlapping. Then, laughter, low, close. He shut the radio off, turned back toward the marker, and the blood was gone. Tom returned to the station shaken but composed. He filed a limited incident report, just enough to document the trip without raising red flags. He left out the voices, the blood, the feeling he got standing there, like something was standing behind him, watching, but holding its breath. That night, he didn't sleep. The next day, he returned with a partner, another ranger, younger, skeptical. They hiked out early, no marker. The post was gone. No sign it had ever been there. No number, no rotted wood, no old blood. Nothing. Tom swore it had been there. He even pulled out a printout of the old map, pointed to the spot, but the younger ranger shook his head. This trail hasn't had a marker past 41 in over a decade. Tom didn't argue. He didn't go back. But 3 weeks later, the tree was struck by lightning. A dry storm, no rain, one bolt. Local fire crews responded, said the tree had exploded, split down the middle, roots blackened like charcoal. Inside the trunk, not bark, not rot, but something carved. A symbol, circle with 3 slashes through it. Same as one of the sketches in Lucas Marin's notebook. It shouldn't have been possible. The park board quietly removed Basin Trail Spur from public listings. Marker 47, if it ever existed, was scrubbed from the system. Not redacted, just erased. No more signs, no blazes, no printed mentions. Tom Ellery retired the following year. Lucas Marin moved out of state, changed his name, never went into the woods again. But sometimes, even now, hikers say they pass by a strange tree deep in the forest. No trail nearby, no clearings, just a blackened stump with rusted metal nailed into it. And sometimes, only when they're alone, they swear they hear a voice on the wind, breathing, laughing, calling a name that isn't theirs. In every park, there's a place that no longer appears on the map. And sometimes, if you find it, it remembers you. They weren't novices. Ryan, Chris, and Jordan had been hiking since their first semester at Appalachian State. By senior year, they considered themselves near experts, the kind of friends who joke about getting lost with a pocket knife and a granola bar and still coming out with a tan and a story. That spring, they planned one last trip before graduation, a 3-day hike deep into the ridgelands, where the trail maps thinned out and the campsites were little more than clearings with old fire rings and sun-bleached logs. The kind of places where GPS flickered, and you learned to trust your gut more than your gear. The trip was smooth at first, warm days, crisp nights, and an empty trail. But on the second morning, after breaking camp near a trickling stream at the base of a narrow ravine, they spotted something odd. A fork in the trail. It wasn't on the map. The main route twisted uphill, as expected, marked by a yellow blaze and worn into the forest floor. But to the left, a narrow, winding path arched gently through the trees, framed by fallen logs, leaves undisturbed. Someone, or something, had tied a faded red ribbon around a broken branch at the entrance. Ryan pointed at it. Shortcut, maybe? Chris, checking the map, shook his head. There's no loop here, just this stretch and an old service road about 10 miles east. Jordan studied the path. Could be new or unofficial? It looked easier, quieter, and curiosity is a powerful thing. They agreed to follow it. That's when everything changed. It wasn't immediate. At first, the loop trail felt like a gift. Smooth, shaded, gentle slopes. But an hour passed, then 2, and something felt off. The sun hadn't moved. Ryan was the first to mention it. Feels like late morning, he muttered, checking his watch. It still read 10:18 a.m., same as the last time he checked. Same as an hour before. Chris laughed. Cheap battery. But when Jordan checked his phone, it said 10:18 too. No signal, no service, no satellite lock. It was like time had paused. They kept walking. Then Ryan started to speed up. "Trail's opening ahead!" he called back. He disappeared around a bend, and then nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just stillness. "Ryan?" Jordan called. Silence. Then a voice from the trees ahead. It was Ryan. Only it wasn't coming from the trail. It was echoing from different directions, out of sync, like a recording played through broken speakers. "Guys? You coming or what? Where are you?" No answer. Just more echoes. His voice again, Barnum. But this time, terrified. "Run!" That's when they saw it. Flashes, not of light but of scenes. Their campsite from the night before, torn apart. Tents scorched. Jordan's backpack shredded, its contents strewn across damp leaves. Then, a flicker of Chris's water bottle, bent and burned. A broken compass, a ripped page from Jordan's journal. None of it had happened yet. They stood frozen. Something moved in the trees behind them. A shape, too quick to follow. Chris turned. "We need to get out. Now." They doubled back, hearts pounding. No sign of the fork, no trail, just trees and brush. Everything looked identical, like the woods had rearranged themselves. That's when the figure appeared ahead, a silhouette in the path, standing completely still. Ryan, or someone who looked like Ryan, only older, eyes sunken, hair streaked with gray, shirt torn, face scratched, breathing in ragged gasps. He opened his mouth, but the scream that came out wasn't human. It was layered, mechanical. A noise that sounded like it had passed through wires and wind and water. Chris stepped forward. "Ryan?" The figure jerked, twitching unnaturally. His mouth moved again, but no sound came. Then, slowly, the figure pointed past them, behind Jordan. They turned. Nothing was there. When they looked back, the figure was gone. But in the dirt, where it had stood, was a piece of Jordan's handwriting. A page from his journal, crumpled, torn. It was dated 2 days from now. And at the bottom, scrawled in red, "Don't follow the loop." They ran. No plan, no direction. Branches tore at their arms, rocks bit into their feet. The woods grew colder, dimmer, even though the sun still hadn't moved. By the time they burst through a break in the trees and stumbled back onto the main trail, it was late afternoon when their watches still read 10:18. Ryan was gone. Chris and Jordan screamed for him until their throats went raw. No answer, just wind. They flagged down a pair of hikers who radioed the nearest ranger station. Search and rescue launched a grid sweep the next morning. They found nothing. No loop trail, no ribbon, no disturbed soil. Just a wall of brush and fire-damaged trees from a decades-old burn scar. That entire stretch of forest was labeled deadland, closed due to unstable terrain and erosion. The local ranger, an older man with lines carved deep into his face, reviewed their account without surprise. "There is no loop trail here," he said matter-of-factly. "Never has been." He paused. "That's old fireland. Place doesn't grow straight anymore. Never quite regrew the way it should have." He leaned back in his chair. "People walk into it sometimes. Not many come out. If they do," he tapped his temple, "they're not whole." Chris and Jordan never hiked again. Ryan was never found. The park later issued a vague advisory about trail safety and unauthorized paths, but nothing more. And deep in the woods, near a ridge no longer marked on the map, a piece of red ribbon still flutters from a crooked branch. Some paths look easy. Some paths look new. But there are places the forest has taken back, places that no longer follow time. And if you step into them, they might not let you step out. The Appalachian Trail, a ribbon of earth stretching over 2,000 miles, carved through valleys, ridges, and the wild pulse of ancient trees. To most, it's just a hike, a challenge, a weekend escape, boots on dirt, a break from the noise. But the silence here, it's not always empty. They say the trail connects more than just states. It links stories, shadows, echoes. Ask around. You'll find people who won't camp past sundown anymore. People who swear by the old rules, never leave the path, never whistle at night. And if something calls your name, don't answer. See, the forest remembers. Footprints fade, but presence doesn't. Emotion lingers in the soil, in the spaces between roots, beneath fallen leaves. Some say memory sticks to the fog here, like sap to bark. You might never feel it, but the trail does, and some aren't forgotten. You heard the stories tonight. 4 encounters, 4 people who thought they were just going for a walk in the woods. But the woods had other plans, because sometimes the forest shows you things you've buried, or things you were never meant to see. A humming shelter in a storm, a woman screaming with no face behind her voice, a bleeding trail marker that shouldn't exist, and a loop trail that rewrote time. Ask yourself, how many others went in and never told what they saw? How many stories are still trapped between the trees, wrapped in moss and old bone and silence? And here's the truth no map will print. What's scarier? What's in the woods? Or the idea that the woods remember you, that when you stepped onto that trail, even for just a weekend, something ancient took notice. And if you listen closely, even now, you can still hear it breathing. The trail isn't empty. It never was. It's watching, it's waiting, and it does not forget. So if you've ever hiked the Appalachian and felt watched, maybe you were, maybe you still are. We're just beginning. There are hundreds of stories buried in those mountains, some whispered by firelight, some never told at all. But Volume 2 is coming, and it only gets darker. Comment your favorite story below, or share one of your own. MindFuel. Fuel your mind. Feed your fear. Subscribe before they find you first. Names fade fast in the forest, even the loud ones, even the ones who left their mark on every log, carved hearts into bark, took selfies at summits like they'd conquered something. The forest doesn't care. It takes, and it keeps. And if you listen, really listen, sometimes you hear them again. Not voices, not words, just a sense, a trace, a whisper in the fog, a photo curling at the edges, a map where trails twist in ways they didn't before. Maybe you saw one of these names tonight. Maybe you recognized a face in the Polaroids. Maybe it looked like yours, or someone you used to know. Name after name now fades across the screen. They say, time is different in the wild. That one step too far from the trail can stretch hours into days, or years, or longer. Ask any ranger. They'll tell you about the hikers who vanished without a trace. How sometimes they show up in reports again, long after they were declared gone, wearing the same clothes, looking older, or younger, or wrong. The credits keep rolling, but these names, they don't feel like endings. They feel like beginnings, like records, as if the forest is cataloging us, watching, remembering. The music continues. Slow, tense, a hum beneath the heartbeat of wind. You start to notice patterns in the maps behind the credits. Circles, repetitions, some trails connecting places that don't exist anymore. Some looping back into themselves. And always, that red thread. It doesn't lead out. It winds deeper in, a flicker. Someone moves between the trees. Or maybe it was just the wind. A whisper. Not the layered ones you've been hearing all along. This one is different. Human. Faint. Clear. A single voice just before the end. Help me. Then silence. And the forest fades. Only the trail remains. Some paths should stay forgotten. It's still out there. Not everything has been told. Not everything is done. Some things in these woods, they don't move like we do. They don't think like we do. They wait. They wander. And they learn. The camera jerks slightly, focusing in on the figure that's now moving closer to the trail cam. Its limbs seem too long, its body unnaturally thin. It doesn't belong here. Footsteps grow louder, but not in a way that makes sense. They don't match the figure's movement. The figure stops, dead still. The camera flickers. Just before the lens loses focus entirely, the creature turns its head. A sharp, sudden motion. It's looking directly into the camera. A moment passes. Another. Then, without warning, it moves again, just as quickly as it had stopped. The footage shudders violently as the figure vanishes into the trees. The static builds, distorting the frame. Do you hear it? Do you feel it watching? It's still out there, waiting, and it knows. You're next.